interestingly, we've seen this upward trend with the S&P here, and we've added some planetary price lines here. The red lines are the positions of Mars, and the green, more or less horizontal lines, are the positions of the trans-Neptunian Vulcanus. And that seems to be providing some clear areas of support and resistance and defining a trading channel for us here pretty nicely. Obviously, we're concerned about being able to break out above the top of this channel. And as of last week, even though we had a failed attempt at a breakout, the prior week, we're still not there yet. So we'll see how all that plays out. Now, as we mentioned earlier, Mercury has just completed its retrograde period. This particular time that's been particularly intense to experience. We've shared some of the results here, and in the little poll we had, everybody was agreeing that this was pretty disastrous in terms of personal results. We've done a lot of work with Mercury over the years. I published a book a few years back called Mercury Money and the Markets, Profitable Planetary Cycles for Short-Term Astro-Trading, and we've examined the role of Mercury, its impact in a variety of markets around the world. So if you're trading equities in Hong Kong or in India or Japan, Singapore, wherever you may happen to be, as well as the major European and U.S. markets, and even in South America, we've got back testing here to show how the Mercury cycles have impacted that in the past. That's a very, very powerful reference volume. Got over 200 years of future data to observe here as well, so that you can use it for a long time. That's what we wanted. Anyway, when Mercury went retrograde back on the 26th of July, it was particularly powerful because it occurred virtually simultaneously with a very powerful total lunar eclipse. We do a lot of work with eclipses and study solar eclipse cycles, look at lunar eclipses. In this case, the fact that it occurred at the same time as the Mercury Retrograde Station was especially powerful, and we saw some immediate reactions in the markets as a whole. I think the biggest example here was what happened to Facebook when Mercury went retrograde, along with that lunar eclipse. We saw that huge sell-off in Facebook stock and a major gap down. Of course, we've seen a little bit of recovery since that time, but the point here is that particular event had a major effect as we began this retrograde cycle. And then Mercury made its direct station yesterday, in fact, on August the 19th. And then we're looking ahead to the retrograde return. It won't be, now that Mercury's moving back forward, it won't get back to the point where it actually went retrograde until the 2nd of September. So at that point, then it'll get back to where it was at the end of July when the retrograde period began here along the way. So we're really in the middle of the overall cycle, but we're past the being in retrograde motion part of it along the way. So as we look at this period, then we can, we'll take our chart here for the daily bars for the S&P 500, and simply this area here defines what happened in the market over the last a couple of weeks, or 3-week period that we had Mercury in retrograde motion. As you can see, that had been in a fairly well-defined uptrend until that point. It began to hit some consolidation, tried to extend its uptrend, pulled back from it. So essentially, we've been in a congested trading pattern here over the last few weeks. Now, we have this direct station, and we want to pay attention to that because sometimes the direct station, when Mercury stops its retrograde motion, can be an extraordinarily powerful event, and oftentimes it's one of the toughest parts of the cycle. We can see reactions in the markets. We can also see reactions in geopolitical or global affairs. Yesterday, this, of course, was the headline. Right about the exact time that Mercury changed direction, we got these major earthquakes in the Pacific, and these are pretty big scale earthquakes, 8.1, 8.2 Richter, something like that, I believe. So it was a pretty significant recognition of the fact that things had shifted on a global scale thanks to this change in direction with Mercury. Of course, in the markets, this is a chart here for the S&P 500, and we've gone back and looked at about 65 years of price history with the S&P, examined all the times that Mercury has gone retrograde before and what happens with the direct station here. So the 0 point on this chart, and we'll show some others that are similar to that, represents the exact date of the direct station. And we've taken the aggregate of this historical data, compiled it and combined it here. So this is the average way that the S&P responds to the Mercury Direct Station. And of course, we go back approximately 3 weeks. The numbers at the bottom represent calendar days. So we can go back here to roughly 3 weeks beforehand to the Mercury Retrograde Station. And we can see from there, there typically is a downtrend, a little bit of a chop, but the S&P tends to go lower after the Mercury Retrograde Station into about 6-7 days prior to the direct station, which is when it begins to move up more decisively. So what happens then with that move following that is we get this move up into the direct station, and it rebounds and goes a little higher than it was at the time Mercury went retrograde. So there's a net gain by the time Mercury has gone direct. And then, of course, after the direct station, we can get 3 or 4 weeks of an extended upward bias to the markets. Now, as you can see from that trading line there, there's a lot of chop along the way, but that's the general direction that we're looking at with the S&P when we have this phenomenon at work in terms of what we're anticipating here now that Mercury has gone direct. Now, Mercury Direct Stations impact different market sectors in different ways, and we've done a good bit of work here. We've been looking at 28 different major market sectors and trying to determine those that are the most responsive. We've found about 8 or 10 of them here that we'll share with you along the way that look the most interesting. These are the conglomerates sector, and as you can see, prior to the Mercury Direct Station, it's basically a flat market, and then begins to trend up much more dramatically once we have the Mercury Direct Station. With wholesale goods, we also have a trend going into the direct station, but there's a period of congestion for about 10 days, 2 weeks after that, before we begin to see a stronger uptrend along the way. With drugs, we get a similar phenomenon here, except for the fact that that congestion period extends for almost 3 weeks on average. So different sectors respond in different ways with a different kind of pacing to them. Insurance, much more straightforward. Notice the downtrend essentially in place from going on the left side there to that -20 mark. That's about the time Mercury goes retrograde, and there is a declining market in insurance on average until the direct station, and then we see the rebound coming in pretty aggressively with that. Diversified services. It's a wonderful sector to try to figure out, but also note here that we have underperformance during the Mercury retrograde period. It does recover again about 6-7 days before the direct station, but once it hits that station, it is very, very choppy, much more volatile, and essentially we're dealing with a flat market trend there following that station. Electronics, much more straightforward, a move upward coming in after the direct station here. Computer hardware, we see a leveling off pattern again. In many respects, this is similar to what we saw before with the wholesale sector, but a little bit more extended than that. Internet and internet services also go through a period of flat trading after Mercury goes direct. So keep that in mind if you're tracking any internet-related stocks here over the next couple of weeks. Recognize the fact that in terms of the sector itself, it may be about 2 weeks to 3 weeks time before we begin to see an aggressive move upward. Be patient if you're holding long positions there. Computer software, very similar, but even more delayed than that previous sector there. So in terms of that congested period, we're looking at coming in almost 4 weeks after that direct station. So we'll be looking at mid-September here before we would expect software stocks to begin to rebound a little bit more aggressively. Transportation, it's very interesting. Transportation is intrinsically associated with Mercury and Mercury phenomena. We hit this direct station and we get a pretty aggressive uptrend after being in a congested pattern during the Mercury retrograde period itself. Aerospace and defense, I think, is especially interesting here, again, because of that extended doldrums, congested trading pattern, really starting prior to Mercury going retrograde and extending throughout the retrograde period. But once we hit that direct station, we see an acceleration in price action in defense-related stocks. And it may be related to the fact that during Mercury retrograde periods, we're trying to figure out negotiations and different stances and things. And then once Mercury goes direct, the communication gets much clearer. Sometimes that's communication of hostilities. And I suspect that we can be looking for a real boom in this sector as we move ahead. So the question is, how do we actually trade this market? And we have, of course, these tools we can look at, the astrological cycles and kind of parse it that way. But we also can do cycle projections. In this case, the black line is the price history for the S&P going back to around the 1st of March of this year. The red line is our cycle projections based, again, on our analysis of about 65 years of history of the cycle work with the S&P. There are different programs, different models for doing this. We play with a lot of them. And in this case, what we're seeing here is pretty close coherence until around the first 10 days of July, and then a divergence between the two models along the way. And then right at the end of July, 1st of August, after the S&P was actually going up as the cycle line was headed down, we saw them begin to correspond a bit more closely. So right now we're at this point here, and we're looking for that uptrend in place with the cycles. We would expect on this basis then, if things begin to conform a little more closely with the actual performance of the S&P, a move to the upside, and we're looking for a potential top for an upward move coming in right on the equinox on the 22nd of September as the sun moves into Libra. That's going to be a pretty significant potential turning point in the markets on that basis. So this is the kind of analysis we do in trying to figure out our trading strategies, and it's one of the approaches that we work with pretty consistently here in terms of getting results for you.